You just own it, because regardless of how bad it may have been, it still is a part of who you are today and went into making you who you are today. And who you are today is amazing and special and beautiful, and every bad thing that ever happened has a greater or equal to positive. And so taking responsibility is not a bad thing. Taking responsibility is just a matter of saying, I am not willing to be hostage to what happened to me in my past by this person or this situation. I am willing to own whatever shows up in my body and take 100% responsibility for how I bring this energy into the world.
Hey y'all, it's Livy Redden. Welcome back to Today is the Future. Today I have on Bryan Post, and we talked about something that I've wanted to talk about on the podcast for a while, and that is really first getting to the basics. We talk a lot about trauma and emotional releasing, but how often is that actually getting defined for us on a core level? What is trauma? What is emotional processing? What does it look like and feel like to work through trauma? And how do we do that? And that's what we went into. And it was really enlightening for me, and I really enjoyed it. And so much of this conversation, especially about when it comes to traumatic events or past experiences, that the pain continues to come up, and it's just like we aren't sure how to really work through it or move forward or free ourselves. He gives such good advice on the topic of release and on the topic of, moving forward and also relating to all of our emotions in a more positive and healthy way. And it was just such a beautiful episode and a beautiful conversation. I really appreciate Bryan. And as far as who Bryan is, to give you some context, he is one of America's top child behavior and adoption experts. He's a renowned speaker and a best-selling author. He is the founder of the Post Institute, which is internationally recognized in the treatment of emotional and behavioral disturbance, especially in adopted and foster kids, and then struggles within the family of adopted and foster children. And what I really love about his approach, and you'll see it very apparent in the way Bryan speaks, is his focus on a love-based treatment approach that really focuses on developing a deeper understanding of trauma, stress, and fear, and how they rule our lives, and then how to use love to bring peace and healing. Because something that really hit home for me that Bryan expressed was that he has kids and teenagers that make the rounds to these, quote, healing practices or therapeutic practices, and they reach him and they're worse off than they were before. And I heard him talking about this to another behavioral expert in a different podcast, because the love and the peacefulness was missing. And so they finally reach him, and they're feeling more disturbed and, triggered and activated than had they maybe not done anything. And I found that really interesting. And Bryan and I crossed paths at a business event in Nashville where he was delivering a talk, and his ability and willingness to discuss emotions and trauma processing in what is often an environment that isn't super welcome to emotional discussions. A business environment, unfortunately, is often not welcome to emotional discussions. And I was so excited to see him up there talking about stuff adjacent to what we talk about in this episode. And he held such a space, and it's really hard to hold a space that can help people, feel safe in working through these things. But it's what we need more of to really heal the world, honestly. And I saw Bryan create that and really deeply care while he was doing it. And the last thing I want to leave you with before we hop in is a statement he said during that talk when I originally first met him was, "Your block is in your pain, and your breakthrough is in the honoring of your pain." And that really resonated with me, and that's the essence of our discussion today, and a topic that I believe will help you release a lot of what may be weighing you down.
I was in 2 foster homes, and then I was adopted as a baby to Bill and Opal Post. Pretty young. I was only like 8 weeks old, so I wasn't in foster care for a long period of time. Thankfully, just in a couple homes. You know, I work with children who've been in 30 and 40 placements. I worked with a child who's been in 70 placements before, so I was very fortunate to only have two different placements.
Right, right. Um, and with your experience, so you had your sister was adopted as well, um, and kind of moving forward into your more late teen, early 20 years, you played football in college,
Hmm.
and my understanding was that was kind of it was through football that where you had kind of decided that that's why you wanted to work with kids. Is that right?
Um, so you were
Something
correct.
along
My
those
sister
lines.
was also adopted. My biological, we're not biological siblings. Um, her early experience was different than mine in that she was 3 months premature, exposed to alcohol, and was in an incubator for the first 3 months of her life. She weighed 3.5 pounds when she was born. You know, mine. I had a good in utero period. My mother, biological mother, enjoyed being pregnant. I have three half siblings. I'm 50, about to be 51. I have a 52-year-old brother. Had a 53-year-old sister, and then I have a 54-year-old brother. So we were all back to back. So my earliest, wiring experiences were completely different from my sister's. So that was kind of the similarities and the differences, that she and I grew up in the same home, but from the very beginning we had different life experiences. And then grew up, and it was a challenging home to grow up in, because my parents, as loving as they were, number one, they didn't understand trauma. They didn't understand the trauma associated with adoption. They didn't understand their own trauma, and that was probably even bigger. They were both children of alcoholics. My father was a Vietnam veteran, came back with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. He worked really hard, worked in a rock quarry for 35 years. But he was, the oldest sibling, one of the oldest of a sibling group of nine. My mother was a child of an alcoholic. Her father died and had a heart attack in front of her when she was 9 years old. And she was also one of the oldest of a sibling group of 10. And the reason I mentioned their place in their sibling groups is because that leads to, for both of them, being what is referred to as parentified. So they both were parental figures to their siblings. And that's in that time and in that era, it was very important. But what that also does is it takes the childhood away from the child, and then they grow up having never really been able to have that childhood. Specifically, how it surfaced with my sister and I is that her very unique emotional arrested development, combined with their parentification, led to a lot of conflict. My sister was very immature. My parents were hyper mature. And so they could never understand why she was as immature as she did. And one of the things that was great for me is that I always excelled socially and emotionally. So I always had a tight friend group. I was a leader. I was very good in school. I got along with my teachers. I excelled in sports. And sports is probably where I was able to work out a lot of my own anxiety as a child and as a teenager. And it was something that I fell in love with very early, and played football. From the time I was in the first grade, I wanted to be a professional football player, and I didn't give up on that dream until I got to college. Went to college on a football scholarship. And then after a couple years of playing football in college, I decided I was tired of being hurt. I remember I had a quad that was pulled. I had an ankle that was sprained, and it was a reoccurring injury. And I was just tired. And being a young adult, 20 years old, I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I knew I wasn't going to make it to the NFL by then. And so my very first class after I quit playing football was Introduction to Social Work. And it was just a natural fit between social work and sociology. I had great professors, and I just excelled, and it felt really good. And then after that, I went to graduate school because I didn't know what else I was going to do. After I finished my bachelor's degree, I went to graduate school because I got into an advanced standing program at the University of Texas in Arlington, and it was just the next logical thing for me to do, was just to get my master's degree. And that's what I did, and that's how I eventually met another mentor and stumbled up on my path towards working with families. It's something that I have done for probably the better part of 30 years. Like I said, I'm about to be 31. I started as a social worker early in my bachelor's degree program, and then pretty much all the work I've done since has been related to working with children and families.
I have a question on when you had first started taking classes around like sociology. Was there any particular, because a lot of young people listening are someone trying to figure out what might resonate for them or something that they might want to pursue. Is there any particular, assignment you did or connection you made in one of those classes where you were like, this really resonates with me and I feel like I'm good at it?
You know what it was? It was the professors. I felt really, really connected to. I had two professors that were mentors, became mentors. One was over the sociology department, and one was over the social work department, and I just really liked them. And funny story is, I actually got a D in my psychology class. Who the professor in that, I don't even remember his name, but it was not a good space for me, which is funny considering I have done extensive psychology work since then. But it was the social work and the sociology professors, Dr. Zellner in sociology and Dr. Shutter in social work, that really made it a natural. It felt easy and natural for me. It was not stressful at all.
That's cool. I mean, it is so cool how it is often the professors that, I mean, it was my teacher in high school that really got me into realizing how much I loved writing and how much it helped me process things. And yeah, it's super cool. I love that. I love that you shared that. And a question I have before we get into more of the thick of things, you've already sort of mentioned the topic of trauma, and as I was prepping for this episode, I just thought about how often we don't really get the concept of trauma really defined for us on a basic level. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, and I'll have you start there. If you could talk about what does that really mean when we say that?
It's an excellent question, and you're 100% right. We don't. Number one, we don't talk about it enough, and number two, we don't think about it in the way in which it's actually defined. Trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. So I'll say that again. It's any stressful event. So give you an example. As you are becoming a more and more proficient and world-renowned podcaster, if every time you did a podcast episode you had some kind of technical difficulties, that would eventually probably cause you to say, this stuff can go to hell, because it would become too stressful. But if you were able to talk about it and laugh about it and kind of think it through and think, well, I wonder what happened and what I could do differently, and maybe talk to someone else about it, which is the processing of it. And then you kind of make sense, either you figure it out or you're just like, you know what, I'm just going to keep doing this. It's going to work out. We're going to figure it out. Then through that process, you're understanding. And then what happens is you take a stressful experience, you're able to express, process, and understand. And then what your brain does is your brain integrates the experience, and then it stores it. So the difference between that versus if you have this, because see, truly, Livy, everyone wants to make trauma all of these really bad things, and those are all traumatic. World Trade Center, wars, COVID, sexual abuse, neglect, all the stuff that's really scary. And that's how everyone wants to frame trauma. But truly, trauma is a part of our daily life. The potential for trauma exists in every step that we take. And the difference between a short-term stressful experience versus a long-term, potentially life and brain-altering experience is whether you can express, process, and understand. That's it. That's the difference. Because then when you're able to express, process, and understand, your brain forms a coherent integrated memory which stores in the brainstem. Therefore, anytime a sensory pathway connected to that experience gets triggered, now the cell that is holding that experience has an integrated and coherent memory. So someone mentions podcast, and it's always fascinating to me because I'm a scientist when it comes to this stuff. But someone mentions podcast who had a really bad experience, it would give you anxiety if you hadn't expressed, processed, and understood. And someone would be, and I'm sure that there are people who have been hosts of podcasts and guests of podcasts right now who won't do it anymore simply because they've had a bad experience that they didn't talk about, they didn't feel through, and they didn't make sense of. Whereas if you express, process, and understand, someone mentions podcast, you laugh, you say, oh yeah, let me tell you about this time, been there, done that. It doesn't phase you at all because it's a coherent memory. But if you don't have that coherent memory, if it's not integrated, then it creates anxiety throughout the whole body-mind system. And that changes everything. And so you can take that high level, because obviously you and I don't consider this to be a super traumatic experience or even necessarily that stressful. But you can take that very minimal stressful experience, and then you can just level that across the playing field for all of the potential things that can be traumatic experiences for people.
Interesting. Something that really stuck out to me as you were describing that was the concept of memory. Because the more I talk to young people and I work through my own past, is there's things that I thought I had processed, but I'd actually just forgotten. And that's really interesting that you bring up memory, because it's almost like you have to be able to bring it up and recall it and address it to actually process it. Would that be correct?
Well, if so, we go back to the intensity of the experience and the perception of the experience. If it's not a real intense experience, and your perception of it is, it happened, it was terrible, then your brain stores it in a way that when you recall it, it doesn't generate overall anxiety. When it is a really stressful experience, a really painful experience, your brain oftentimes wants to shut that down as soon as possible. When that happens, and you don't express, process, and understand, it gets stored in your brain in a very incoherent, disorganized way. And so the only way, and so you have 27 billion cells in the human body, 27 billion. Any one of those cells carries memories. Anytime one of those cells gets triggered, it triggers the whole 27 billion, which then changes your complete perception about the world you're living in the moment. So it completely knocks you out of the present moment. Now, it's also referred to as post-traumatic stress disorder. It's also referred to as flooding, and all these different terms that we use, being overwhelmed, having a panic attack, all these different things that happen. In fact, I'm just going to give you go on this little tangent. My mom just this morning, flew from my house to California. She's going to stay with my daughter for a period of time. She called me, and this is how we express, process, and understand it. We're not really conscious of what we're doing. She called me this afternoon. I just assumed she was calling to tell me that she had landed. She texted me and said, I'm with Michaela. But then she said, when I was on the plane, I got sick. She said, I threw up on the plane. She said, I started getting really hot. Then I started to panic. And the next thing I knew, I was throwing up. And she said, I threw up in that little bag. And she said, and then I got up and I was trying to walk down and she told me the whole story. Well, that's important. Every detail that she shared with me, and she will continue. She won't even realize what she's doing, but she'll continue to share that story. She'll share it with all of her siblings. She's got 3 siblings that she talks to on FaceTime probably 3 times a day. She'll tell that story. She'll tell that story to my wife. She'll tell that story. She'll tell it so many times. And that's the process of expressing, processing, and understanding. It just happens automatically. But if my mom called me and she said, I don't want to, oh, that's gross. Oh, let's not talk about that. How's the day going? What are you guys going to do next? And I change the subject, and that happens to everyone she talks to, I guarantee you the next time she starts thinking about getting on a plane, she's going to start to freak out. Or if she forgets, she gets on that plane, the plane's starting to take off, she has a panic, and this is how the root of panic attacks and phobias get created, is all of a sudden she's taking off on that plane. She completely forgot about when she was landing. She gets halfway up in the air, she starts to panic, and she's freaking out. She doesn't know why she's freaking out. She just knows she's freaking out. And this is a woman who flies all the time. That's one of the things she said to me. This is the first time this has ever happened. So then what happens is she makes it through that. Her brain creates an association between the plane, the temperature of the plane, whatever she was seeing at the time, the sounds, the smells, the movement, all these sensory experiences are occurring. They get anchored into the plane in that moment, and then from this point forward, she can't get on a plane without freaking out. And she's like, I don't know what happened. Then she's terrified. I don't want to fly. I'm not flying anymore. Before you know it, she doesn't want to fly anymore. And that's when you don't have an opportunity to express, process, and understand. So then I would have to go all the way back with her. I would say, when was the first time it happened? I would process with her. I'd get her into a state, and people say get into a state. What they're talking about is getting into a state level of memory. Your state level of memory is your bottom level of memory in your brainstem. It's associated with your personality traits. So then when I get her into a state, I'd get her to slow down. I'd get her to start breathing. I'd get her to get in touch with her body. I'd say, think back to the first time that happened. She'd go, oh, when was that? Oh, when I was flying to Sacramento. Okay, slow down, breathe into that. Now I'm going to put her into that emotional experience, which means I'm going to actually open up that cellular experience connected to that memory. I'm going to have her feeling it. I'm going to have her talking about it. She's probably going to cry because guess what? That memory is probably associated even with a deeper memory that she's not even in touch with. And that's what's fascinating about how we process and store memories and experiences, is that a lot of time the thing you think you're freaking out about actually isn't even the root of the thing. So many of these things can go all the way back to in utero, because as early as the 4th week after conception, the fetus can hear. So you're hearing and you're processing and storing memories. As early as the 2nd trimester, the fetus is capable of psychological processing. So you're thinking about things that you're experiencing through the biological mother. And these things are all preverbal memories. Now, I'm not saying that happens all the time, but a great deal of time, things that happen in the present, we associate with stress and pain and fear and overwhelm, but in reality, they actually link back to other times in our lives when we felt helpless and hopeless and didn't know what to do.
Right. Thank you. And thank you for that example, because that made a lot of sense. And that was exactly, I didn't even have to ask. That's exactly what I wanted to get into, was like because I find that, myself included, and the audience that listens, where we're all very self-aware, and we kind of understand. We can be self-aware that we're having a reaction to something, maybe have a general idea of where it's coming from, but the processing piece seems to be hard to get to or work through.
It's hard to get to on a couple of different levels. One, it's hard to get to because in our society we do not encourage emotional expression.
Right.
And so when painful things happen to people, no one's wrapping wrapping themselves around them, saying, have those feelings, let that out as much as you need to let it out, let it go. We don't do that in our society. We try to push it away just as fast as we can. So we have that level of cultural conditioning that doesn't allow for emotional expression. And then the other thing that we really struggle with is that we get conditioned for blaming people and things and situations on how we feel. So we might have an awareness of something, but then what you tend to want to do is to focus on that internal feeling you have about how pissed off you are because someone did something to you or made you feel some kind of way. Now, as soon as you do that, you're externalizing your power. You're actually giving your power over to that other person or that other situation, and it removes you of your ability to take full responsibility for what you're experiencing. And so because we have those two kind of struggles culturally and in our families, we move away from the fact that it's actually very simple to have an emotional process. You just stop, you slow down, you breathe into your body, get in touch with the experience, and honor the feeling. Honor what it is, and the Greek definition of the word honor is to assign intent no greater and no less than what was deserved. So you go back, you take any experience that you want, and it's really, we've had so many experiences, you're not going to remember or even need to remember all the painful ones, but the ones that you do remember, those are the ones, the scary ones. Slow down, breathe into your body, get quiet, get into a quiet place, review the memory, review the experience, close your eyes, find it in your body, and then find that feeling. What did you feel during that experience? And allow yourself to have that feeling in this present state, in this present day where you're completely safe. You allow yourself to have that feeling as much as that experience deserved. Mm-hmm. So if you were 5 and you lost someone in your life, or someone was mean to you, or someone ran away from you, or something really bad, you were sexually abused, or any number of things, whatever feeling you had at that moment, that's what you honor in the present today. And you honor that for as much as you need to. And what that does is that takes that emotional experience, because that's all emotion is. Emotion is energy in motion. So it's just an energy. And energy has to be able to move. It never disappears. It just gets, this is what energy does with trauma, because trauma is just an energetic experience. It just gets stuck in our brain, in our body system, in our body-mind system. And it doesn't move, and then it gets triggered, it gets turned on, and it takes over. So you have to be willing, and I say willing because it's really scary to honor feelings when you grow up in a society that doesn't allow you to do it. Have those feelings. If you were pissed to high heaven, be pissed to high heaven. If you were sad and made you feel like you wanted to cry for 5 days, well, be all the sad you can be, and just like you're going to cry for 5 freaking days, even though you're not. You're going to probably cry for 10 minutes, but you may feel like you have sadness that's going to wash you away for a lifetime. That's what makes you not want to do it. Instead of just giving into it. You give into it, you cry, you be mad, you feel whatever it is you feel, you honor it as much as you want to honor it, and then as soon as that energy has been expressed, you'll relax. Mm. You'll be like, oh, I didn't die.
Yeah.
Nothing bad happened. I didn't have a nervous breakdown. I actually don't feel depressed. Yeah, maybe I still feel a little sad, but let me see. Maybe I want to go in and maybe there's some more sadness in there. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Now you just went off to a different, now you just, where you started isn't where you finished. So you start in one place, but if you really allow your body and the energy to flow, it'll just go bing, 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 and it'll just pop off all these little experiences and these little emotional opportunities for you to just honor. I did a YouTube video at a training that I do for my staff in California, and we do emotional process work. I love to do it. I've been doing it for 20 years, but we do it in groups. And so, in order to model for them, I started first, and so it's on my YouTube channel on Bryan Post, BRYAN POST, and I'm laying on a mat. You can see it in the thumbnail. I'm laying on a mat like this. and I'm doing an emotional process. In a period of 20 minutes, I went through 4 or 5 really painful feelings and experiences. But I started at this one. I started at this top level. In fact, I asked one of my team members, I said, where do you guys want me to start? Because there's so many memories. The whole key to all of it is just getting open to whatever you've experienced, whatever's there, and not judging it and shaming it and blaming it, but just taking responsibility to honor it for whatever it is and however you feel.
Thank you for sharing that framework, because that was going to be my next question of like what might a process like that might look like. And I love that you describe it where it's simple. Like, I think we sort of overcomplicate, like it's going to be some sort of crazy, exercise or like magic wand, when really it's just like a matter of, when I feel it, am I giving it space?
All that's cognitive. So I'm tapping my left hemisphere, because all that overthinking, all that worry and curiosity about what it could be or what it might be, that's all in the left hemisphere. And your emotional experiences and pain and trauma and hurt and all that good stuff, all that's in the right hemisphere and in the body. And so you can't really engage and fully process and honor that right hemisphere stuff through your left hemisphere. That's why so much of therapy sucks, because all your therapist wants to do is talk to you. All your therapist wants you to do is sit and babble for a freaking hour, and they just want you to talk and talk and fucking talk. Talking doesn't get to it. So if your therapist isn't confident, isn't courageous, isn't passionate enough to engage you in your right hemisphere, to support you to slow down and go into your body and have whatever feelings you're going to have, you're going to spend 10 freaking years just talking. And you're still going to walk out of those therapy sessions and be flipping out and losing your mind and feeling just as depressed as you always did after 10 freaking years. I know people who've done it over and over and over again. Then you end up on medications, you end up labeled, it's all this craziness. Mm-hmm. When we could just stop and slow down and breathe and get into our bodies and honor our feelings.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the experience Bryan is describing is like the exact experience I had, where grew up with a terminally ill parent. I went to therapy. We talked and we talked and we talked. I got on medication. I got off medication and realized that nothing had ever been processed. And I was like worse off than when I started. And it was just and it's like the cycle is ridiculous. And I love that you brought up that video on your YouTube channel, because I watched that video, and I was actually going to bring it up, and I watched it, and I would encourage anyone listening to go watch it. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. I will say it's difficult to watch. However, I sobbed as I watched that video, and when I watched it, actually at the end, exactly as you described, I thought, wow, I want that. And I want everyone to experience that release of after it's been processed. Like, that feeling is just so beautiful, and very rarely are we, having someone like you express how to enter that zone of processing and just inviting us to sit in it. And so it's just, it's simple, but man, if only we talked about doing it more.
It's heavy. It's heavy stuff. It's heavy stuff. And it's funny because we use that as a model in training. Because I'm not going to ask someone to go somewhere or do something that I'm not willing to do myself. I feel like it's unfair. I feel like it's biased. I just don't feel like it's the right thing. I'm not going to ask you to have some deep emotional process and be vulnerable if I'm not willing to do it. If I haven't done it 1,000 times, I'm not going to ask you to do it. And so we have our team members. Some team members are like, that's fake. he's that's not even real. And I'm like, wow, that is really interesting that you can watch someone have an emotional experience and be that overwhelmed that you just have to chalk it up to not being real. When when I see emotional expression like that, like I get excited. Like I
Right?
love it. I mean, I'm like, ooh, that's good. I mean, and it's sometimes in some of the work I've done with families, and I can feel it right now. It's literally like a symphony orchestra. When someone hits a really deep, resonant, emotional place, it is like, ooh, that's so good. Oh, I mean, it's like they are right. Oh, yes. And sometimes when I'm working with someone, they can be on the cusp of it, and I can feel all the energy moving, and it's just like, whoa. You can just feel it's like, you know how you build up to the crescendo? It's just like that. And then it's like, boom, and then they just break through, and it's like, oh, God, it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. And what I 100% agree, and I mean that's a big reason why I do what I do as well, where it's just like uh often people just haven't been, you know, offered a space to be like it's okay.
Absolutely, one
And
hundred.
and I
That's right.
you know, another reason, something I want to mention too of why I would love people to see that video is because, you know, as someone that was raised by parents that were amazing and had were so loving, and I never questioned if they loved me or wanted the best for me. However, simultaneously, they were raised by fighters and just like perseveres, and we're fine and we survive, and that's who they were, and that's who I was and still am to an extent.
That's
And so
generational.
when you see someone like Bryan, who is intellectual, a professional, in front of his colleagues, uh, saying this is okay, it's okay to do this, I would imagine so many people like have never seen anything like that. And so I don't know. It was I would encourage it from that perspective, and also um, uh, if anything we've talked about as well brings up any fear for people, because I know big emotions can feel fearful. Something that really that came to mind that helps me feel not afraid of some of those big emotions that might be helpful for someone is I had a neuroscientist on my podcast, and she said if you can frame it just as data, like when these feelings come up, it's like that's data. Let's get curious about it. Like sit in that
Mm,
and we'll connect the dots and
yeah,
it'll be interesting. You
yeah,
know?
there you go.
Um
That's right.
and so I know we're getting a little low on time since we did have some of our technical difficulties. But you know, earlier you had brought up the idea of responsibility as well, where another thing that holds us back is not stepping into the responsibility of you know, maybe that not the trauma we experience might not have always been something that was inflicted by us, and so it feels kind of like, well, I didn't have any control of that, and now it's my responsibility to work through it.
Mm,
So yeah, I'm curious what comes up
mm-hmm.
for you when about
Oh,
personal
yeah.
responsibility and what you might want to share on that topic.
I think that's fantastic. That's a fantastic question. Um, you didn't cause it. You didn't do it. It wasn't your fault, but it's your responsibility based on what you carry with you. And it has nothing to do with the experience and the how and the who and the what. The only thing that matters is how you feel about it. And so if you feel angry about it, then you deserve to feel angry about it, and that's taking responsibility. And you deserve to feel as angry about it until you're ready to feel sad about it. And then when you're able to feel sad about it, then you it's time to let that it's time to have that grief. Time to grieve it, and it's time to honor it, and it's time to make sense of it, and it's time to see and watch how it shows up in your life today and all your relationships today. And then it's time to make sense of it, and then it's time to just own it. You just own it, because regardless of how bad it may have been, it still is a part of who you are today and went into making you who you are today. And who you are today is amazing and special and beautiful. And every bad thing that ever happened has a greater or equal to positive. And so taking responsibility is not a bad thing. Taking responsibility is just a matter of saying, I am not willing to be hostage to what happened to me in my past by this person or this situation. I am willing to own whatever shows up in my body and take 100% responsibility for how I bring this energy into the world. That's it. It's not about blame. It's not about shame. But see, that's the thing. Our society gets us so focused. And I think our society at some level wants us this way. They want us focused externally. They want us blaming. They want us feeling shame. They want us rationalizing and justifying, because all that does is it just disempowers you. And so it just keeps your energy level dialed down, because you feel like you're literally helpless to external situations, and you're not. You're not. Responsibility is about owning your own energy. It's about owning your own consciousness. It's about owning your own power. And the bad things that have happened, they just go into growing you and making you that much more of a badass.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I love it. I could listen to you talk forever. You're so cool. And I know because we were gonna finish up at 2:30. I want to be.
I'm fine.
Okay, I want to be cautious of your time.
So I'm 2 hours ahead of you, and I'm at the end of my day. So
okay.
It's all good.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting, and what you bring up of I think partially that it's our society wants us to be that way, because it's much easier to also influence people when they're in a state of like blaming and anger and not sort of grounded in their own mindfulness and personal responsibility, which is what we were wanting to talk about.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I'll bring up that question right now, since this sort of ties right into what we were talking about. A question I had got from somebody in my text community when I told them that you were coming on the podcast was, she had asked something very adjacent to what we're talking about, was how do you leave the feeling sorry for yourself mentality? And so I think, because some of us might understand on a like a self-awareness level, like, yeah, this isn't helpful, but really actually be like stepping into that empowerment, I feel like might be a different ball game. I don't know if you have any thoughts for her on what she might actually be able to do to really be like, I actually am not going to just feel sorry for myself anymore.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question, and I'm gonna give you an answer that's probably counterintuitive. And so what I would say to that is feel sorry for yourself more. Like, carve out some space to feel really freaking sorry for yourself. Start right wherever you're at. Just say, I feel so sorry for myself. I feel so sorry for myself, and breathe into that and go as far into that as you can. And as you're going into that, ask yourself, when was the first time you had the experience of feeling sorry for yourself? What was that about? And then honor that feeling, because the feeling sorry for yourself is just the symptom of a deeper experience. And a lot of times we want to just stop feeling sorry for ourselves, or we want to go work out, or we want to go get drunk, or we want to go shopping, or we want to have sex, we want to go drive fast, we want to go do all this stuff to keep us from feeling sorry for ourselves. And the truth is, you really just need to go further into it. Just go further into the feeling sorry for yourself until you can get to the root of it. And once you get to the root of it, like you said, explore it, investigate it, make the connections. It's data. It's data that informs your whole life. And so spend some time with that. Maybe carve some time out every single day. Give yourself 20 minutes of feeling sorry for yourself, and really feel sorry for yourself. And then after you do that, you're going to find out you don't want to feel sorry for yourself for the rest of the day. and you can go move on. But if feeling sorry for yourself shows up, and I like to tell people it's kind of, because a lot of times it's like our child us, the child part of us that had these experiences gets so conditioned to taking over, and we get so used to letting that child part of us take over, that when we get stressed and that child part of us that takes over, they step in front of us. It's just like they step in front of you and they say, I can handle this. You go sit down. Let me handle this. Even though it's an 8-year-old you or a 5-year-old you or a 3-year-old you, they step up and get in front of you and they make you take a back seat. And then they want to feel however they think they're supposed to feel in order to protect you based on how they had to protect you in that past experience. They're doing it now in the present. At some point, you have to pick up little I feel sorry for myself and hug her and hold her and tell her it's okay to feel sorry for herself and pat her and console her and tell her to let it out. And then you set her down and you say, I got this now, baby girl. I got this. Now let me go ahead and face the world. And you move forward. You move forward through that.
Yeah. That's good. That's good advice. And I like what you said too, of like picking her up, hugging her, letting her feel sorry. And I think I would also invite people to, like, you can use that wording, whether you're sitting with yourself, thinking it, saying it, like, it can seem weird to be like, talk to yourself as if, you're a child almost. But I would invite, I would invite anyone listening to do that, of like, I see you, I'm listening, and feel sorry for a minute.
And let me give you another framework, Livy, that'll help, and your audience that can help with that. It's just grieving. It's just grieving. It's no different than if you picked up a small child, and that the only difference is the child happens to be you, and you just say it's okay to have your feelings, and you just allow that child to grieve. And as you allow that child to grieve, you encourage it. We so quickly want to shut down grief. And I believe that grief is the single most pervasive form of trauma that exists in our society today. I used to call it emotional absence, but I don't think it's emotional absence anymore. I think it's the grief. It's the grief that comes from the emotional absence, but we don't have an opportunity to express and process and understand, and that is the process of grieving.
Interesting. I've never heard it framed like that. And as you're describing that, it's it makes me kind of reflect, and I want to share this because this might be helpful for anyone that's listening as you're sort of, applying what Bryan's mentioning to your own life. And for anyone, because I know there's a lot of people in my audience that have been through some really difficult things. And it's interesting because when you hear the word grief, like having when my dad passed when I was 17, since then, therapists and friends, family, what they bring up is like, well, have you worked through the grief of your father's death? And we often kind of tie the death and the grief together. And the interesting thing is that I had done that really before he passed because he was terminally ill. However, no one ever really brought up to me, did you ever grieve the loss of your childhood? Like, did you ever, and like, that's what's been coming up, where it was like, that's the loss that I never actually really let her feel sorry. And I really like the framework of calling it grief, because we usually only really use that in in a death context.
Yeah.
It's really
100%.
interesting. And before I ask you, there was one other question that someone had sent in. Is there anything else that you would want to, touch on that you feel like might be helpful for my audience?
I'm just here to serve however I can.
Perfect. One other question that someone had sent in, where I was like, I really feel like you could give some awesome guidance on this. And let me just pull up what she had sent me. She sent me a text in the text community I have, and she said, Um, Hey, Livy, I've got a question about a topic. Have you talked about the concept of talking about your feelings, specifically negative feelings, with others on your podcast at all? I have a friend who really struggles with this and keeps all of her emotions in. She thinks it's better to portray herself as happy and positive, while I agree to an extent that people don't like to be around emotional vampires. I also believe it's important to express your feelings with people you trust. Any tips or thoughts on this?
Oh, those are excellent questions. I love those. I love those questions. The thing with that is a person who tries really hard to be upbeat and positive, yet internally feels hurt or angry or ashamed or stressed. Alan Shore says something really important. He's a neuroscientist. He says that the core of the self is nonverbal and unconscious and lies and patterns of affect regulation. And what that means is it's not what you say or do, it's how you feel when you're doing and saying it. 90% of communication is nonverbal. So your friend who's just trying to put on the positive, happy face is probably bitching and moaning and complaining all the time while she's smiling and trying to be positive. And then people walk away from the interaction going, God, that was weird. Ugh. Because she's not just honoring where she's at. Most likely, she grew up in a household that was emotionally absent and not very present. So there was never really a space to just allow her to be where she needed to be and feel what she needed to feel. And so she, in order to have acceptance, in order to maybe receive affection, nurturing, she couldn't complain. She probably had to make everyone else happy. She had to smile. She had to be cheerful and positive, and yet internally she's depressed, which is so consistent with so many comedians. There's all these Robin Williams, great example. It might be older than your time, but famous comedian who committed suicide. They named the tunnel in San Francisco after him. But he was funny guy, made everyone laugh, but he was depressed. He hung himself. It's like, and it's consistent. Jim Carrey talks about his lifelong affliction with depression and how he learned, because his mother was depressed, how he learned to literally throw himself against a wall to try to make her laugh. And just, you take on a persona based on what you feel is going to get the positive feedback that you need to just sustain life and be in relationship, because relationship is the most important thing. And so then you never learn or feel the safety and the trust, the security of just being authentic. It's like somewhere inside of you, you don't believe it's okay, and so you don't permit it.
Yeah. You really called me out with that one. That's good. That's so good. And I have thoughts on that. Well, first I'll ask this. I imagine like with the girl that asked the question, she can't really, change her friend. So there's not really going to be, anything for her to do about it.
What she can do is, it's the same thing I ask parents to do with their kids. You get really quiet, and this takes some confidence and it takes some security in the relationship, but get really quiet while she's putting on the happy face and look at her and just say, how do you really feel? And wait. And give her the space and give her the presence of knowing that you see through that facade, and what's important is what's behind it, and you want to know, and a lot of times it takes seconds. If you really slow down, and and we all encounter people who are always smiling and they're always happy, but if you'll slow down and you'll say, no, what's really going on, they'll drop right into it. They'll drop right into it, and that may give that friend an opportunity to feel something that she's been needing to feel for a long time. And then it also gives the other friend like some confidence and some reciprocity, because the other friend's like, oh God, finally she's giving me something real that I can hang on to. And so a lot of times it's just a matter of slowing down and holding the moment sacred, and just giving your friend a place. And I've done this with my own friends. Yeah, I grew up in the country. I give you a perfect example. My best friend, he's this big, and we're celebrating his 51st birthday this weekend. He's this big, red-headed Irish guy. He wears a big, long, gray beard. He rides a Harley Davidson. He's always, frowning. He's the most beautiful person. He's my own personal Eeyore. I love him to death. I've loved him since the 3rd grade. We've known each other that long. And there have been many times, and he'll say, he jokes about it, but he's like, oh, Bryan's he's always hugging me, or he's always making me cry. Because I'll just stop and I'll be like, bro, what's going on? And he'll fight it, and he'll fight it. He's like that character in Good Will Hunting where he's trying to resist it. Don't fuck with me. Don't fuck with me. Don't fuck me. And I'm like, it's not your fault, dude. And before you know it, he's like, ah, and we're both, ah. It just takes a little bit of time, We just have to slow down. And we're all human beings, Livy. We're all human beings. And this really frustrates me with the mental health field is, somewhere in mental health, the professors and the mentors, they tried to create this barrier between the professional and the personal. And you'll hear mental health professionals say this all the time. You got to be professional when you're in the office, and you can't disclose too much personal information. Bullshit. It's all bullshit. You can't separate your physiology. You don't have professional cells and personal cells. It's all your physiology. Who you are is who you are, which is who you show up with. We're all just freaking human beings doing the best that we can. No one is any better than any other person. We all hurt. We all suffer the same way. Byron Katie says pain is pain. We all suffer. And so the sooner we can get through that, and sometimes we're stressed and we got things going on and we can't always be present. But when you can, slow down and be present. And I lost Livy again. Oh, gosh, it's beautiful.
Riverside, dude. Oh, my goodness. I'm going to get, like you said, I'm going to get podcasting trauma. Gosh. Okay, it got it on recording then. Okay, cool. Gosh. Anyway, what was there? I mean, I guess I'll just go into my rapid fire questions and I'll stitch that together. First question I like to ask is, what's the best thing you bought that cost less than $100?
So let me give you a couple. One is the first book I ever really remember consciously reading, and it was $6, and it was called Out of Control by Thomas Hollywood Henderson. He was a famous Dallas Cowboy linebacker in the 1970s, and reading that book turned on my love for reading, and I am a voracious reader. So reading that book I think I was probably in the 8th grade, really was life-changing for me. Another one was probably in my late 20s. I paid $100 for a Kobe beef steak, and it completely changed the way I thought about steak. Every steak got compared to that Kobe steak. And then probably one of the most recent was a $100 Opus X cigar. I love cigars, and it was fantastic. It reminded me of that Kobe beef steak. So
That's
probably
so
not
funny.
the answers that you might be used to.
No,
but,
I like it.
Yeah.
I love a good steak. My family lives in Georgia, and just there's a restaurant by my parents' house that their steak, just no one makes a steak the way they make a steak, and it's just
Fantastic.
like, Can't get it anywhere else. Second question is, what piece of advice do you give others that you often have a tough time taking yourself?
Oh gosh, what what do I usually say to people? Probably saving money. I'm always like, you need to. I'm not big into saving, but I tell people to save money, and I don't. I've never been a saver. It's so interesting.
That's a
Yeah,
funny answer.
yeah. That's
Yeah, I
probably
like
the
it.
biggest one.
I feel like that's probably what a lot of people might say.
Yeah.
Um, third question is, some people have more passionate answers to this question, others don't. Is there a fashion or clothing essential that you have, or like a specific item, thing you always have with you, anything like that?
Yeah, a black T-shirt.
Or black
It's
t-shirt. I have
it's
noticed you're like all black in the.
I had four black T-shirts come in the mail just yesterday. I'm always ordering, looking for the perfect black T-shirt. I'm kind of the same way about shoes. It's like right now I'm on an on cloud kick. I think I have 20 pair. They're just piling up in my closet. Um, but yeah, black T-shirts is kind of my mainstay. My wife oftentimes hates them. She's like, they're faded, they're shrunk, and I'm like, no, they're beautiful, they're fantastic. But
I
that's
love that.
probably the most consistent. I'll mix it up from time to time, but black T-shirt is probably my main thing.
Where's the best black t-shirt? Where have you found?
You know, this one is called Clean Fresh Tees. And what I love about them is they send them to you all individually wrapped in plastic. And it's like every time you open one, it's like opening this new shirt. It's like fresh. I really like those.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I've seen like an ad of theirs or something. That sounds
Yeah,
familiar. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I really like them. They fit good.
I like it. Fourth question is, what's a song that you've had on repeat lately?
Oh, that's an easy one for me. And you say lately, but I'm gonna say probably for the last 18 years, it's Christina Aguilera and Herbie Hancock's version of "A Song for You." It was
Huh.
originally written by Leon's last name is Leon Russell, and he was actually from Tulsa, Oklahoma. But it's called "A Song for You." It's the Christina Aguilera and the Herbie Hancock version. Absolute favorite. Then there's one more because I love music. Um, Chris Cornell did a version of "Nothing Compares to You" from Prince. You know, Sinead O'Connor made it really popular, but Prince wrote that song for Sinead O'Connor. Became really popular, her version, but Chris Cornell, who was the lead singer for Soundgarden, who committed suicide, he has a version. Man, it is good, and I listen to it um, probably 3 to 4 times a week. And then I really like "Black Skinhead" by Kanye. It's my cold plunge song. So when I get ready to cold plunge, I put on my headphones.
I like it. I like it. And then my last question is, you already sort of answered this, but well, I guess not really. What is a book that you love?
Oh, a book that I love. I love "As a Man Thinketh" by James Allen. It's very old. It's very small. I just listened to the audio of it again. Um, I really love the 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. That's a real popular one that I like, and I also like the Essential Writings of Khalil Gibran. It's a book of poetry, and I really love Khalil Gibran stuff.